In this episode of Heretical Heathenry, I cover, well, me, my story, who I am, how I got here, and what makes me the heretical heathen. Alright, get ready for an episode. Thank you all for tuning in to the Heretical Heathenry podcast. Hello, my fellow heretics, and welcome to another episode of the Heretical Heathenry podcast. This week's going to be a little strange. I've been going to work at a separate location that's kind of far away from home. I've been having to drive roughly an hour and a half every night, work all night, and then drive another hour and a half home. So I didn't have time to sit down and work out a script like I have for the last few episodes. So today I thought I'd do something more off the cuff, which is particularly hard because I'm not good at yapping, at least not yet. And so for this episode, I thought I would focus on what heretical heathenry is, why I'm the heretical heathen, and what brought me into even the dramatic pagan sphere in the first place. And before we dive into all that, I think it'd be kind of interesting to go back and look at early childhood stuff. It seems to me that there are a lot of common motifs when you meet people who are in this more occulty sphere. We were always like weird kids. We weren't like the normal kids. We weren't stars. We weren't playing football or sports or any of that stuff. We're sort of the weirdos who were at home playing video games, reading comic books. And for me, and that definitely was me, I spent a lot of time by myself and getting into the paranormal. I was one of those kids who would watch Ghost Adventures and Taps and whatever other show I could. I was really into like the Bigfoot shows and all that cryptid stuff. I would stay up all night watching people hunt for Bigfoot in the woods, always to never find any evidence of him. But I still sat up and I watched it all the time, just hoping that maybe, just maybe, there's a little more to reality than meets the eye. And I grew up in like the early 90s, and if you're not from a city in the early 90s, there's not a lot of good information on things like the paranormal. We didn't have big libraries where you could go to and find like the spooky and ghost section, the horror section, and start rifling through books and trying to find information. So we had to do what we could. And for a lot of us, that meant spending hours either after school or in our computer courses perusing the web looking for all the information we could. And back in those days, the websites were horrible. The information was largely made up. For those of you of a certain age, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a particular gothic font. There's pictures of like demons and coffins and old school looking churches. Really kind of cliche stuff. And despite the fact that these websites were horribly cliche and cringy, it was all the information we had. And so you would spend hours, days, even weeks just tumbling down the rabbit hole trying to find something of interest, looking up different kinds of spells, right? A real popular one back in the day, and this might seem a bit silly now, but it was everywhere, was a spell to change your eye color. And I'm hesitant to even call it a spell because it was something as simple as trying to focus and just change the color of your eye while like staring at yourself into a mirror. And again, I know that seems silly, but this thing was everywhere. For some reason in the early 2000s, people were very concerned about the colors of their eyes. Little did we know about this curious technology called the contact that would soon be in everybody's palm. And now everyone can change their eyes all the time. So hey, maybe the spell worked. Who knows? But you go from this, especially when you're a teenager, to like changing your eyes to like friend spells, and a big one is love spells, which are still popular today. In fact, there wouldn't be a witch talk without things like love spells and love readings. Back in the day, in these websites, it'd always be something like, write down the girl's name that you like on a piece of paper, light a candle, fold the paper up, seal it in that wax, and then light it on fire. And then boom, magically, the girl will somehow fall in love with you, even though you've never spoken to her and you only give her awkward stares from across the classroom. Big surprise, these things never worked. They didn't even push you in the right direction. We had no understanding of how magic was even supposed to work back then. At least not in these small towns where I grew up. And so that left you to like a scientific method. You would get spell after spell, and you would try working after working, just seeing what would land and what wouldn't. But at those ages, ultimately nothing really works unless you really understand like what you're doing and how to orient yourself. And so you end up going further down the rabbit hole and exploring religious traditions outside of the Abrahamic paradigm. And for a lot of us, that is more of a result of us being mad at our parents or grandparents that forced us to go to church. That's something even modern pagans today have to sit with. A lot of that is still there's a lot of hatred still in the soul of a lot of modern pagans. And one of the first things you end up running across is either Wicca or white people Buddhism. And I say white people Buddhism because back in those days, the only understanding the West had of Buddhism was filtered through people like Crowley and the Theosophical Society. And so you have this weird misinterpretation of Buddhism where it's sort of like an atheistic, quote-unquote, religion that just entails sitting around and meditating, and oddly has this weird negative belief that the entire world is suffering and that it's your job as a Buddhist to remove any and all feelings you have so you don't feel like suffering anymore, which for a teenager is a horribly negative message. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, hey, maybe I should give Buddhism a shot, absolutely do, but find somebody who knows what they're doing. Don't listen to most people in the West unless they're trained by somebody who has a legitimate lineage. And I say all this because I wasn't really attracted to Wicca. I went more of the Buddhist route myself. And I had that belief, right? I thought the world was suffering. And part of it was just because the person I was, I guess, born as, right? I'm not particularly tall. In my teenage years, I was wildly overweight. I'm still overweight, but I've lost like 100 pounds, so I'm constantly working on that. But back in those days, yeah, I was short, I was fat, people didn't treat me very well. And so I thought, hey, here's this path to enlightenment that included sitting in the woods and trying not to feel anything. And I kind of feel like it messed me up a little bit. Even today, I find myself largely apathetic to a lot of things, and sometimes I wonder if that is a result of early white Buddhist training. There's also this huge misconception with Western Buddhism where the goal of the entire practice is to just empty your mind of all its contents. And while that's one path to meditation, there are many forms of meditation, but for some reason that was the one that would really stick. And I don't know if that was a result, again, of like figures like Crowley, or if that was something that filtered in to the West through early kung fu movies. Once I started walking down this quasi-Buddhist path, I sort of got over the spell work, largely because they never actually seemed to do anything. And I kept going down this path all through high school. I kept going in the woods, meditating, doing all that sort of stuff. And then I entered college, and that's when things changed. So when I was in college, I started with one major and I switched a few times, and I ended up in philosophy. Now, a philosophy background teaches you to think in a particular way, and it elevates reason above all. And you start reading figures in the philosophical tradition. And I found myself attracted to figures like Hume or modern people like Daniel Dennett. And so I fell down an empiricist rabbit hole and I became an atheist. And not like an atheist in the sense that I just didn't believe in God or anything. I was one of those cringy, like Richard Dawkins atheists who felt like it was my place to do battle with all of these dumb religious people who are in the world and tell them how silly their beliefs are. Of course, I didn't realize then that actually atheism is a fairly new thing, and the vast majority of the human population that has ever existed has been some type of theist, or at the very least, they believed in spirits of some kind, whether those be spirits of the land, ancestor spirits, or what we in common vernacular call the gods. Philosophy professors try their best not to impart their own particular worldview onto their students, but there is something about a university system, at least the modern university system, and I'm sure it's gotten worse now than it was when I was in it, that trains you to think a certain way. It trains you to view the world from a very materialistic, specific kind of frame, and it doesn't appreciate you going outside of that. In fact, a lot of people look down on you for that. And you see this in online forums all the time where they try telling you that like education correlates with a specific set of atheistic beliefs. When maybe what's actually happening is those universities are training their students to think that sort of way. Now, I stayed an atheist through my entire college career and into later life. I would go as far as to say I never really thought about it after college. It just didn't seem that important to me. My primary focus was getting a job, an apartment, and surviving, doing all that day-to-day stuff. And I don't think that actually changed until probably when COVID hit. It was a really rough time for a lot of people. And there was something about COVID that gave us a lot of time to sit around and think. Especially other people. I was one of those frontline workers, and it felt strange. Like, for the first time in my life, I was literally being saluted as if I was like a soldier who went to war, when really I'm just putting stuff on a shelf. It's not very complicated. I didn't deserve to have that sort of honor. But I started looking into my past, right? When you're an American, you don't know who you are. You're a diaspora, a foreign person, in a foreign land, cut off from everything, right? You have no idea where you came from. And so, and 23andMe is really popular at this time, so we started going down that lane. You got your DNA tested, you found out, oh hey, I'm of like a Germanic and Scandinavian background. But then you have like other questions. You start wondering, what were Germans and Scandinavians like, or what are they like now? You start doing a deep dive into their cultures. You look at their foods, their music, the way they dance. And after all that, you start wondering, what were they like before they were colonized by Christians? And yes, it was a process of colonization. Just because a population is European doesn't mean they were also not colonized. It's through this process that eventually you end up coming across like the poetic and prose Eddas. And you dive into that and you start reading the stories about Thor and Odin and Loki. And you realize that these were real to these people, to my people. These weren't just characters in a Marvel movie for you to watch while you forget about your miserable existence. They had embodied meaning. They were in the world. These were lived realities for my people. And that didn't get me down the pagan path, but it got my foot in the door. It started as a merely intellectual pursuit. But around this time, I was also reading the work of Carl Jung. If you're not familiar with Jung, look him up, start reading his work. It will change who you are forever, I promise you. Start doing that. When I started listening to podcasts about Jung and what people thought about his theories, and then I ran across a specific creator. I think his name's Creative Codex. You can find him on Spotify. His work is absolutely brilliant. Just the way that he presents it and the way he speaks. I wish I had a voice that sounds like this guy. It's gorgeous. Very mystical. But he has this one episode, I think it's called Jung's Digging Meditation. Yes, it's Jung's Digging Meditation. And so I tried it out. It's fairly simple. You just imagine yourself in a location. You picture a shovel in your hand. You feel what the shovel feels like. You feel the weight of it. You imagine specific colors if you want. And then you start digging into the ground. That's it. That's the whole meditation. And then after doing this for 5 to 10 minutes, I was sucked into a vision. Now, I know that may sound dramatic, and it is, and I literally mean that. I was sitting on my bed imagining me digging down, and next thing I know, as if in a movie theater, I'm somewhere else, watching a scene play out, in which a god shows up and things show up, and of course the god was Odin. And he wasn't how he appeared in the stories. He appeared to me as a giant fire. And there was something about that moment that caused a change in me. It oriented my psyche in a new and fundamental way. It turned me towards the good. Now, just to be sure that I wasn't crazy, I ran some tests. I found a coworker who was open to experimenting, and I gave him the meditation. And just with me, it sucked him into a vision too, though he didn't have the unique religious experience that I had. And so I decided to pursue this Germanic heathen thing more seriously. And when you're in these states, it doesn't feel like imagination, as a lot of people want to say these things are just in your imagination. Now, we can sit there and we can picture things all day, but what these experiences are something above that, right? You're not in control. Something is happening to you. It's coming down to you from something that is not quite you. And when they happen, you will never be the same. It's as though something from above has decided to start an alchemical process within you, and the person you were, much like the Nagrado state, has to die in order to be born anew into something new and to orient yourself in a different, better direction. Now, when I share these experiences with people of the more Abrahamic leaning faiths, they'll tell you that these are demonic experiences. But I find that a bit odd, right? Because after these experiences, a lot of people have changes for the good. I lost more weight. I got a wife. I now have a home. I started a Substack. I now have a podcast. These are not the effects of demons. These are more like angels that have come down to deliver a message to you and change who you are and reorient you and reshape you. It was after this experience, and a few more like it, that I decided to commit more to the Germanic pagan path. And there's lots of different branches to this path. I've written about a few of them. And people are never quite sure what to do, right? We have eclectic pagans who just want to do whatever they want and buy all their little crystals. And then we have strict reconstructionists who want to do exactly what they did 1,000 years ago. And so you never quite know where you want to be when you're walking down this path. And you have to slowly figure that out over time. I mean, I never really felt comfortable in either. You know, I found one path to be a little too loosey-goosey and do whatever you want, and I found the other to be a little too restrictive and not curious enough. And having studied philosophy when I was in college, my mind was always more open. I'm a very curious person naturally. And so while I'm doing this Germanic heathen thing, slowly trying to figure it out, I was also watching a lot of chaos magicians. You know, people like Gordon White, and even guys who are more interested in Thelema, like Jason Louv. And so I started wondering again, like, is magic some kind of real? And just like in my teenage years, I decided to explore magic on the side while I'm doing this heathenry thing. Except this time, over a decade has gone by, and the West is far more comfortable with itself and is far more knowledgeable on the Western magical traditions. And so, unlike when I was in high school, it worked. And when I mean it worked, I mean it really worked. No, my eyes didn't change color, right? But I did perform a few things, and it felt like something noticed. It felt like I would think of something, and then I would immediately see it happen in the world, which sounds crazy, and it is. And that would happen for about a week. I could think of clowns juggling cue balls of fire, and I would walk around the corner and I would see a mural of just that. And so for about a week, it feels as though you're going to go crazy. And if you're the type of person who has issues with mental illness, I would not suggest doing that. I could see how one could very easily get lost in the sauce and have their psyche break over experiences like this. And so on the one hand, I have this Germanic pagan thing that I'm trying to figure out. And on the other hand, I very much know that magic is some kind of real. And these are two, let's say, opposites in the dialectic, pushing and pulling each other. For those who are into Germanic heathenry, they do not like magic. They do not like occultism. It feels either too satanic, too evil, too wrong, or it feels too Abrahamic. And they're partly right. Once you dive into the grimoires, you'll see a lot of Abrahamism. And you can dive into texts like the PGM, and sure, they're calling on a lot of Greek gods and Egyptian gods, but there's also Jesus and Christ in there. And pagans don't feel comfortable with this sort of thing. And so what am I to do? I'm in these waters, all alone. It's just me out here. And the sun is set. So I started exploring cultism. And I did find that there's a few authors, and all of them are Stephen Flowers, who've written a lot, at least on rune magic, and that's a start. And despite what you think of him, his views almost have nothing to do with the rune magic. In fact, I'd be shocked if anyone could point to any of his problematic beliefs while he's showing you how to do bind runes, but these are the things that come up nonetheless. It's almost as if there's like a force trying to prevent you from going down the magic road, and so they have to put up these silly, oh no, he's racist gatekeeping signs, like a do not go over here. This thing actually works. Stop racism. Oh my god. While I got a lot out of his rune magic stuff, I just didn't quite feel comfortable with it. Like, it didn't feel like it worked the same way that other things worked. But it was an interesting practice nonetheless, and I even used some of it today. A lot of stuff I felt was a bit silly. Like, I didn't really enjoy the rune yoga. If you don't know what rune yoga is, it's exactly what you think it is. It's standing in a position shaped like a rune, and then often accompanied with chanting that rune's name. It's pretty simple. There's some meditation exercises I still got from the 9 Doors of Midgard that I would suggest all people do if you're a Germanic pagan. So while I'm doing some of these practices from Futhark and the 9 Doors of Midgard, I'm still listening to occultists like John Michael Greer on the side. He's probably one of my favorite occultists now. He's brilliant. Everyone should give that man a like. Go look up his stuff. Buy his books. Listen to his podcasts. And he did a version of the Golden Dawn, which he calls the Celtic Golden Dawn. If you're not familiar with the Golden Dawn or the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, it was a late 19th century esoteric initiatory order founded roughly in 1888 that syncretized ritual magic, symbolism, spiritual ascent more than any other Western tradition. I think it's an offshoot of Freemasonry. You can double check that. But the aim of it is to transform the soul through structured contact with like higher realities. And ever since its inception, guys like John Michael Greer, I think mostly John Michael Greer, have been working to do these sort of offshoots and variants of it. Well, I found after a few months that there's a heathen version of it, and so I explored it. Something about the Heathen Golden Dawn is structured in a way that very much, I guess, vibes with me, for lack of a better word. The rituals make sense, the runic correspondences make a lot more sense, and I sort of noticed that there's a Platonic through line, which I suspect comes via Order of the Golden Dawn, or technically via Platonism through the Order of the Golden Dawn and down into these other lower initiatory orders like the Heathen Golden Dawn. And so there's like this thousands of year old through line that's embedded in the Heathen Golden Dawn, and something about that is, well, it's magic. That said, these systems aren't for everyone. In fact, I would suggest the vast majority of people don't be involved in them. And for one, they're very, very boring. My first year, and I'm still in the first grade, has been doing a single lesser banishing of the pentagram, followed by a middle pillar. Now, at first, I did it daily. Now I do it when I need it. Heathens will spend years doing bloats and praying to the gods with little or no responses. But something about doing something as simple as this silly pentagram ritual vastly changes your life. It changes everything about you. It changes who you are. Sure, there's a psychological effect to these rituals. Now, drawing the pentagrams can calm your inner fire, or it could give you an inner fire. But there's something more mysterious, and which is why I can't stop doing it. And that's when you do these rituals, the external world seems to respond. Now, if you do a banishing ritual, people seem to look at you different. If you do an invoking ritual, people seem to treat you differently. And there's something mysterious there, something that you are called to explore. It's not something that you can necessarily choose to do. When I was reading Iamblichus, he sort of suggests that people are born in line of certain gods. And I think it has to do potentially with the astrological magic that they believed in back in the day. So you could think that like Odin's a god, and if you're born under a specific sign, then you're sort of in Odin's chain of being. And it's those kind of people who are drawn to specific practices like magic, like theurgy. And maybe there's something to that, because it certainly feels like I'm like a moth to a flame. I'm drawn towards this thing, and I can't seem to stop. And so I need to find a responsible way to explore it without putting myself and others in harm's way. And just like the magic, I can't stop myself from pursuing that which is true. And so I'll look outside of specific Germanic sources, deep into the metaphysics, to try to understand what these things are, how they function, and how best to think about the world that we find ourselves in. And this is why I am the heretical heathen. This is where I fall. You have these universalist types, which are called fluffy bunny, wicked true, rainbow heathens by some. They don't care about truth at all. They don't care about philosophy. They don't care about metaphysics. All they care about is, well, to be quite frank, what they care about is a certain sect of political leanings with Germanic characters painted over them. These are the sort of people who try to tell you that all the Germanic gods are queer because, again, like Loki turned into a fish. It doesn't make any sense, but these are what these people are like, and they just don't care about the greater reality. On the other side of the fence, we have these more folkish types. If you're not familiar with folkism, roughly stated, it's the belief that people ought to follow the religion of their people, and there's a variety of reasons and arguments for either camp. But the folkists, likewise, don't care about truth. They don't care about how the cosmos actually functions. What they care about is what their people did thousands of years ago. If they thought the Germanic people thought the world was flat, then they would tell you they believe the world is flat, because that's what their ancestors believed. And so I don't find myself comfortable in either of these camps. I don't care about inclusion. I don't care about queering the gods. And I don't care about LARPing as if I'm an ancient Norse person in modern times. I care about the truth. I care about becoming enlightened and becoming a better person. And I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get to that place. If that means doing magic, drawing little sigils on a piece of paper, then I'm going to do that. But I'm also going to do this Germanic pagan thing on the side. I'm just going to do it my way. And we'll see who outlasts who. When these universalist or folkish types still find themselves walking around feeling absolutely meaningless, can they hold on? Will they outlast us? Will they outlast me? I don't know. But I feel that my feet are more firmly planted, and my soul is oriented towards the good. And that's all I really need. And I think that's good enough for me. It was certainly good enough for Plato and Iamblichus and Porphyry and all of these great thinkers. It's good enough for Plotinus. For those of you who don't really fit into either one of these camps and don't want to fit into any one of these camps, I encourage you, get aboard. Let's go. Let's chart our own territory. Let's sail into new horizons. And if you're like a Wiccan or an occultist and you're listening to this and you kind of vibe with me, then feel free to reach out. Maybe we can work together. Let's do something. Let's build a better future. And let's stop all this arguing and bickering over shit that won't matter this time next week. Thank you all and have a great day. This is the Heretical Heathenry podcast. I look forward to seeing you all next time.